Nice to see you all back again. Hope you've had a good week. Wonder what you've been up to. Me and Rusty, we've been enjoying the sunshine, enjoying the beach, and generally having just a nice chilled time. Hope yours has been as good as ours has. Anyway, back to the butterfly lion, and I'm really enjoying this story. I think we're probably going to have 3 parts today so we can get through the book. Probably not today, we'll probably finish it next week, but there's 3 parts to this week so that we can get to a good point that enables us to finish next week. Okay? So settle down and here we go with the story. Okay, the butterfly lion so far. It starts off with a young boy running away from school, meeting an old lady who takes him into her house for a cup of tea, and he can see a lion on the hillside in chalk, and the old lady starts to tell him the story of the butterfly lion, which all begins in Africa with a young boy called Bertie, who adopts an orphaned white lion cub who he adores. And he's very upset when his father decides that the lion cub is to be sold to a French man who owns a circus, and that Bertie is to be sent to England for school. So anyway, this is what happens. Bertie's at the school. He's very unhappy and he tries to run away. He bumps into a young girl who he becomes very good friends with. The young girl is the old lady. She's telling this tale of when she was young as well. So she met Bertie when she was a young girl, and they become good friends. And Bertie promises that he won't run away. He'll go back to school as long as he can come and see her again. So that's where we left it. So Bertie came every Sunday after that. Sometimes it couldn't be for long because he had detention back at school, or maybe I'd have to send him away because father was down for the weekend shooting pheasants in the park with his friends. We had to be careful. He did mend my best box kite, but after a while we forgot all about flying kites and we just talked and walked. Bertie and I lived for our Sundays. In those next 2 years, we became first good companions and then the best of friends. We never told each other we were because we didn't need to. The more I got to know him, the more I believed everything about Africa and the White Prince in the circus somewhere in France. I believed him too when he told me again and again how somehow, someday, he would find his white lion and make sure that he'd never have to live behind bars again. The school holidays always dragged interminably because Bertie wasn't there on Sundays. But at least there were no lessons to endure with no lips. She always went off in the holidays to stay with her sister by the sea in Margate. Instead of her lessons, though, Nanny Mason would take me on endless nature walks. Walks on the wild side, she called them. I grumbled and stamped my feet. But it's so boring, I'd tell her. If we had zebras and water buffaloes and elephants and baboons and giraffes and wildebeest and spotted hyenas and black mamba snakes and vultures and lions, I wouldn't mind. But a few deer, a foxhole, and maybe a badger set, a dozen rabbit droppings, 1 robin's nest, and some cuckoo pint. Once, before I could stop myself, I said, "Do you know, Nanny, there's white lions in Africa, real white lions." "Fancy that," she laughed. "You and your fairy stories, Millie. You read too many books." Bertie and I didn't dare write letters to each other in case somebody found them and read them. But school term came round again and he'd be there under the wych elm on the first Sunday at 3 o'clock without fail. What we found to talk about all the time, I cannot honestly remember. He sometimes said how he could never look at a circus poster without thinking of the White Prince. But as time passed, he talked less and less of the White Lion, and then not at all. I thought that maybe he'd forgotten all about Tim. We both grow up too quickly. We had one last summer term together before I was to be sent off to convent school by the sea in Sussex, and he was to go away to a college under the shadow of Canterbury Cathedral. We treasured each meeting, knowing how few we had left. We were silent in our sadness. The love between us stayed unspoken. We knew when our eyes met and when our hands touched. We were just so sure of each other. But before he left me that last Sunday, he gave me a little kite he'd made in carpentry lessons at school and told me I had to think of him every time I flew it. Then he went away to his college and I went away to mine in the convent, and we didn't see each other again. I was always very careful when I flew the kite he'd given me, just in case I lost it up a tree and couldn't get it back again. I thought that if I lost the kite, it would be like losing Bertie forever. I kept it on top of my cupboard in my bedroom. It's still up there to this day. Now we did write because we were away from home and it was safe to do so. We wrote letters that talked to each other just as we'd done all those years on Wood Hill. My letters were long and rambling about tittle-tattle at school, about how much happier it was at home now that No Lips had left. His were always short and his handwriting so tiny you could hardly read it. He was no happier shut inside the walls of his cathedral precinct than he had been before. There were bells, he wrote, always bells. Bells to wake you up, bells for meals, bells for lessons, bells, 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 cutting his days into thin slices. How we both hated bells. The last thing he heard at night was the night watchman walking the city walls outside his dormitory window, ringing his bell and calling, 12 o'clock, a fine night, and all's well. But he knew, as I knew, as everyone knew, that all was not well, that a great war was coming. His letters and mine were full of the dread of it. Then the storm of war broke. Like many storms, it rumbled only distantly at first, and we all hoped it would somehow pass us by. But it was not to be like that. Father looked so grand in his khaki uniform and shiny brown boots. He said goodbye to Nanny Mason and me on the front steps, climbed into his car and was driven away. We never saw him again. I can't pretend I grieved much when the news came that he had been killed. I know a daughter should grieve for a dead father, and I tried to. I was sad, of course, but it's difficult to grieve for someone you never really knew. And my father had always been a stranger to me. Worse, so much worse for me, was the thought that the same thing might happen one day to Bertie. I just hoped and prayed that the war would end while he was still safe at college in Canterbury. Nanny Mason kept saying it would be over by Christmas. But Christmas came each year and it never was over. I remember Bertie's last letter from college by heart. Dearest Millie, I'm old enough now to join up, so I shall. I've had all I can take of fences and walls and bells. I want to fly free, and this seems to be the only way I can do it. Besides, they need men. I can see you smiling at that. All you remember as a boy. I'm over 6 foot now, and I shave twice a week. Honestly, I may not write again for some time, but whatever happens, I shall be thinking of you always. Your Bertie. And that was the last I was to hear of him, for a while at least. The dog was whining at the kitchen door. "Let Jack out for me, will you?" said the old lady. "There's a dear. I'll tell you what, I'll fetch down the kite Bertie made for me, shall I? You'd like to see it, wouldn't you?" And she went out. I was only too happy to let the dog out and shut the door on him. She was back sooner than I expected. "There," she said, setting the kite down on the table in front of me. "What do you think of it then?" It was huge, much bigger than I expected, and covered in dust. It was made of brown canvas, stretched over a wooden frame. All the kites I'd seen had been more colourful, more flamboyant, and I think the disappointment must have shown in my face. "Still flies, you know," she said, blowing the dust off. "You should see how she goes. You should see her." She sat down in her chair and I waited for her to begin again. Now then, where was I? I'm so forgetful these days. "Bertie's last letter," I said. "He was just going off to war. But what about the White Lion, the White Prince? What happened to him?" I could hear the dog barking wildly outside. She smiled at me. "Everything comes to he who waits," she said. "Why don't you have a look out the window?" Okay, stopping there, click straight on to the next part.